Hello, and welcome to another episode of AP Taylor Swift, the podcast for Swifties who like to dive a layer deeper into the music. So lean in close, turn up your volume, because class is in session. We're your hosts. I'm Monty.
I'm Jen.
And I'm Jody.
And we are your unofficial professors of Taylor Swift.
Welcome back to another episode of AP Taylor Swift. This is Jody, and I'm thrilled to be the one that gets to introduce you all to our summer school edition of the podcast. This summer, we're going to be bringing you a mix of brand new episodes and new topics, as well as revisiting some of our favorite episodes and topics from this past year. And we're kicking it off today with one of my favorite episodes, a show and tell on Greek mythology. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to the Greek mythology episode when it came out, don't worry, it's here for you. And if you did listen to it, I think it's always good to revisit some old topics. So without further ado, here is our show and tell on Greek mythology. This is a topic we've started talking about a while back. I think back in our satire episode, like a year ago now. But before we get into Greek mythology, just a quick reminder, we have a weekly Substack where we do some extra credit. We tell you what the episode is for the week, and then we like to nerd out a little bit. And I think this one probably is going to be one where we go a little bit deeper, maybe talk about things that we didn't get to talk about on the episode. So be sure to subscribe to our Substack, aptaylorswift.substack.com/subscribe. You can also find the link in our show notes. And of course, make sure you are subscribed to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. So hit subscribe, hit follow on whichever podcast listening app you so choose, so you never miss an episode. With that, Jen, do you want to give us I was going to say a quick synopsis of Greek mythology, although I think that's kind of an oxymoron. So why don't you just at least a little intro? What should we know before we dive into our conversation today?
I have definitely recommended this before, but I'm going to immediately start with a book recommendation. I highly recommend the book Mythology by Edith Hamilton. She essentially took the main stories in Greek mythology, all the original sources that we have access to, and tried to combine them in a really accessible way. So the idea of doing a quick summary in Greek mythology is insane. That'll never happen. But Edith Hamilton's book is about as close as you can get to an actual quick summary of overviewing Greek mythology. But Greek mythology is every single listener, even if you do not view yourself as someone who would be interested in Greek mythology, you have been impacted by it. So some of the original authors, I say that with quotes, and I will explain that in a moment, would be people like Homer, who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, or Ovid, who wrote the Metamorphoses, or the dramas of Euripides or Sophocles. Wow, that one was really hard. Sophocles, there we go. And these stories, so all of those names I just mentioned were authors who wrote something down. So you would recognize so many of the stories, things like Hercules, Jason and the Golden Fleece, the Trojan War, you think of the Trojan horse, all of those things, Odysseus, Cyclops, all of these things that comes from Greek mythology. However, what I think is really cool about it is, well, there's a lot of things that's cool about it, but the thing that is just objectively cool, I think, about some ancient stories like these, or even some of the original earlier works in English, like all the way back to Beowulf and Old English, is that we had these authors and we're like, yeah, they wrote this, but we also know they didn't write this. And really, they wrote it down, that the oral tradition is how we had these stories. Everyone knew these. There was religions around these gods and goddesses. People had these stories they told each other, and people just wrote them down, and then that's how we have access to them now, which is really cool, and why literacy is awesome, and many other reasons. But I think it's interesting to think about it in that way, because if you think about today, the way we treat stories today is that we often think about them as being owned by the author, which isn't always true. If I think about like Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling and all the drama that's happened there in the world of fanfic, we know that that's a story that's ours now when we're playing with it and we talk about it, and, death of the author, that's a whole thing. But the idea that there were stories that everyone knew and everyone was just talking about them is really cool, that the stories were owned by the people who shared them and who talked about them and who interacted with them and believed them. And that's just a really cool thing. I think we're getting back to a little bit more with social media and some of the storytelling that's happening in that way. But we'll get into more of the stories as we go into our songs. But I wanted to just kind of start with that, give you some highlights of the things you would recognize. Also, highly recommend the Percy Jackson series. That it is are genuinely good books. I read them as an adult and really loved them. And they get into these stories as well. But even if it's not just something like Percy Jackson, where it's like clearly this is a mythologically based story, I guarantee almost every piece of art and literature in the West in some way, shape, or form has been influenced by Greek mythology and Roman mythology. They're kind of two sides of the same coin if we're oversimplifying it a little bit. And that's just insane if you really think about it. Like, we think of the impact Shakespeare has, and you get into mythology influenced Shakespeare. Like, you can't get away from it. It's everywhere.
It seeps its way into popular culture in ways large and small, or even just into our day-to-day lives. I think just yesterday I was telling someone at work, like, we're flying too close to the sun. That's a reference to Icarus and Daedalus, right? Like, that's just now part of it's a colloquialism. And I think we see references and colloquialisms in Taylor Swift's music as well, some of which are more explicit than others. So spoiler alert, today we will actually not be covering two of the more explicit ones, like Cassandra and the prophecy from the Tortured Poets department. We did talk about them this summer in our Tortured Poets department summer school, so we'll drop those links in the show notes. But there's a lot of more implicit references in her music as well, and I think that's at least what excites me. For example, I mentioned the satire episode we did last year in Mastermind. I think it was "I'm the wind in your free-flowing sails" that we referenced to the Odyssey and Odysseus. And so I think there's some cool things like that where these little references come up in her music that I'm excited to explore.
Yeah, and I think I also took an angle where even though it might not be explicit references to Greek mythology, I think one thing is also these stories are so foundational to our culture that you can also take familiar storylines or common narratives and apply them to stories in Greek mythology because it's such a foundational piece of Western literature. And so there's also that angle of there's direct references and allusions, and then there's this idea that the very structure of storytelling is loosely based on traditions that started back then. And I mean, it's not for nothing that if you were to study any humanities, I think it's worth saying that it's not just like it's a story, it's the very foundation of kind of the civilization. So it goes a little bit even older than even just the tradition of storytelling. It's like the very fabric of the culture. So it's kind of hard to separate where that begins and ends at where we are today. It's just so deeply woven into our human nature at this point.
Well, and we, all three of us here have different religions, so I feel like this is a very safe space to say this. We're not insulting any religion by any means, but this was a religion. This wasn't just, oh, this is a fun story. To your point about the fabric of reality, they were stories they told, but the stories were ways to explain how the earth and how society and how people came to be the way that things were, which is why they were so important. This was not just, I use Harry Potter as an example, which is true from the author perspective, but we don't think of it that way. Like, it's more akin to stories from religious texts in a lot of ways that over time we now treat more like a Harry Potter type of thing. But at the time, they were very much explaining the reality of their world.
And that might be a really good transition to my song and the first song, because I decided to take one that maybe has a story, relates to a story that does talk about the world and creation of the world. So before I tell you the song, I want to tell you the journey that got me to the song, which is, we talked about Greek mythology as storytelling. Greek mythology is also some of the oldest folklore we have. And so I very quickly was like, I want to see if there's a song on folklore that could relate to Greek mythology, because we know that Taylor talked about the album Folklore as storytelling, folklore, myths, etc. When I think about folklore, I also, it's not just me, Taylor herself said she thinks about folklore as spring and summer. So there's a lot of like earthy album aesthetics. And in my head, I went to the hymn to Demeter. So I've got my Homeric Hymns from college out. I guess, yeah, I'll tell you the song. The song I picked was My Tears Ricochet. Folklore came out in 2020, track 5, written by Taylor Swift. Before I get into the song, I'll tell you a little bit about the hymn to Demeter. So Demeter is the goddess of the harvest. Her daughter is Persephone. She was abducted by Hades, who was the king of the underworld. Demeter basically like searches desperately for her. And while she's searching for her daughter, she causes a famine, basically. So she is goddess of the harvest. And she says, while she is distraught about her daughter's abduction to the underworld, nothing will grow. Nothing on earth will grow. So Zeus is like, well, that's not going to work. He intervenes. He tells Hades, hey, you got to return Persephone. But he's slick. He gives her some pomegranate seeds. And because she eats while she's in the underworld, then she has to return to the underworld. So while she gets to go to her mother Demeter, she can't stay there full time. Joint custody situation. She has to return to the underworld for 3 months every year. And during that time, when she is not with her mother every year, Demeter is mourning and permits no growth. And this is what in Greek mythology explains the seasons. So spring, summer, and even probably a little bit of the harvest, when things are growing and bountiful, that's when Persephone is with her mother Demeter. But when she has to go down to the underworld with Hades, that is winter. That is when everything is barren and there is no growth, no crops. So that brings us back to the introduction that you both gave and both talked about. Like Greek mythology is religion that's explaining why the world is the way it is.
It's also making me realize it was wildly off-brand for me to not mention Hadestown the musical.
I was going to get there.
I just saying, I literally had to myself said, oh, don't forget to mention Hadestown. That is also a great example of Greek mythology in current culture. And I'm so sorry.
I was going to bring it up.
I mean, we knew what would happen eventually. I'm apologizing for the error of my ways.
We accept your apology. Done.
While we're listing references, I would also like to make a plug for the Disney animated film Hercules.
They're making a musical out of that.
They are. It's going to be great. So maybe we'll do part 2 when that comes out. Okay, anyway. My Tears Ricochet.
Right, yes.
So in Hymn to Demeter, Demeter is heartbroken. She is devastated. And this song, which we talked about in our 1-year anniversary episode, which we'll also link down in the show notes, this song is heartbreaking. This song is devastating. There's a couple lines in here that, to me, reminded me a lot of the Hymn to Demeter and specifically Demeter's perspective. The song she sings, and if I'm on fire, you'll be made of ashes too. Even on my worst day, did I deserve all the hell you gave me? So this, I could see Demeter saying this towards Zeus, who gave permission to Hades for him to have Persephone. So in the Hymn to Demeter, the line is, no other mortal is to be blamed, save cloud-gathering Zeus, who gave her to Hades. So Zeus literally gave permission for Hades to abduct Persephone, and Demeter is on fire and saying, if I am upset, you'll be made of ashes too. Nothing else will grow here. You will all suffer if I am suffering. She also, in the song, the line, I didn't have it in myself to go with grace. That like, I can't be the bigger person here. I can't do it. And Demeter does not have any grace when letting Persephone go to the underworld every year. She is like, if I can't have her, no one's going to be happy here. Again, in the hymn, the line is, she said she would never set foot on fragrant Olympus and never allow the grain in the earth to sprout forth before seeing with her eyes her daughter's lovely face. Like, if I can't see her and have her with me, nothing's going to grow. No one's going to be happy here. The other lines that came up to me, you had to kill me, but it killed you just the same. Again, the famine, the line is, she's plotting greatly to destroy the feeble races of earthborn men. Like, you want to make me miserable? Great. You're going to be miserable too. That one specifically more like the famine really hurt. I was going to call them the earthlings. This is where my brain is, guys. It hurt people more than it hurt the gods.
They are earthlings.
Earthlings. The gods toyed.
Mortals,
God, I think. Thank you. That's, earthlings, mortals, same. The gods, mortals are the gods' playthings in Greek mythology. And so if the mortals are suffering or are dead because of famine, gods aren't going to be happy because then they don't get to play around. They don't get to intervene in their lives. So you had to kill me, but it killed you just the same. Again, if I'm going to suffer, you're going to suffer too. And then finally, before I definitely want to hear what you all have to say too. And I can go anywhere I want, just not home. This is the one where I'm like, ooh, this could also be Persephone, because Persephone also can't go home to her mother
Who's trapped
for a part of the year.
Although Persephone can't go anywhere.
She can't,
really.
exactly.
She's pretty locked into two locations.
She's correct. So the bigger one is really, this is Demeter, who is a goddess. Like, goddesses have power. She theoretically has everything except her daughter, who is her home. And so again, this is definitely not one of those, like, it's not Cassandra, which is directly referencing Greek mythology, although in our episode this summer, I think we talked about how even the song doesn't perfectly align to the myth. I get the feeling and the emotion in this song of this devastation and something awful happening, that something has been taken away, something that should have been home and comfort and peace, and someone is really trying to hurt me deeply. This is where this song really, to me, I was like, oh, hymn to Demeter.
I love this comparison.
I do too.
I was also thinking about the home thing too, and spoiler alert, folks, we're going to be deep diving this one, and I now know that I'm going to be going into that thinking about home very much as a person, which is a really cool interpretation.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I love about Greek mythology in particular, and maybe a lot of mythology in different cultures, is because they're such early stories from an earlier phase of civilization, they're always so dramatic. And the emotions were very extreme. And in Greek mythology in particular, there is a lot of heartbreak and revenge, and very, very drastic measures taken for punishment. And
it's unhinged. It's just so unhinged.
Yeah, we're going to be referencing it all over the place today. Like, I'm going to talk about Sisyphus later, but there's so much drama. And I think the fact that this song carries so much emotion, almost to that extreme, like, go anywhere, just not home. It's such a powerful song. It makes a lot of sense to make this kind of an analogy. And that's what I was kind of talking about earlier, where even when it's not directly referencing a thing, there are indirect references that can help people relate to just the magnitude of the emotion that we're talking about. And especially in folklore and evermore, I think that was kind of the thought behind it, is link it to these everlasting, evergreen stories.
These stories that stand the test of time.
And have really, like, basic emotions, really the very
core emotions,
human core emotions.
I feel like basic, we've talked about basic gets a bad rap, but like, yes, that's core human emotions.
Foundational. Fundamental. Yeah.
The other thing I really like about this is, and we talked about this, I think, in our anniversary episode a little bit, the stolen lullabies line.
Oh, yes.
Which we discussed a little bit in the context of Taylor, but also the idea of a mother losing her daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And how, again, one of those things where it doesn't just have to be Taylor, but the idea of when you can't sleep at night, you hear my stolen lullabies, that there is this parental thing there of a child who can't sleep even.
Mm-hmm.
That could be an interpretation of this if you look at it from Demeter's point of view. And also was thinking to listeners, we don't always know what connections each other is going to make. So as you were saying all that, I was reading through the song again, the idea of we gather here, we line up, weeping in a sunlit room. The idea that Demeter and the rest of her community is upstairs, quote unquote, in the light, not in the underworld, weeping. So even if it's winter, you still can have sunny days. So the idea that image becomes so powerful to imagine a mother in the sunlight, like I'm imagining snow everywhere, weeping with her family and with her friends because she cannot see her daughter who was in the underworld and who was very actively not in the sunlight.
The stolen lullabies line, I'm glad you brought that up because it is really integral to the hymn to Demeter. I forgot that in this story is also, she is mourning, and then I guess she goes in disguise, not as a god, and starts to care for somebody else's child because she is so in mourning for the loss of her daughter that she starts to care for this other child, but she at night like keeps it in a fire to protect it and try and make the baby immortal. And then the parents find out and are like, what are you doing? Why are you keeping my child in the fire? And then she reveals herself as Demeter. But anyway, so like the maternal element of this story is very integral. And stolen lullabies, I mean, Persephone was taken when she was like a younger girl and really grows up in the underworld, so it really does connect to this song very well.
Cool. Well, I'm going to go into the second song. Mine is also from that 2020 era of Taylor's songwriting. I picked Long Story Short, track 12 from Evermore, also came out in 2020 and was written by Aaron Dessner and Taylor Swift. I picked Long Story Short because I was just listening to a lot of songs, and I kind of wanted to do something similar to Jody, which is like, which of these stories kind of reminds me of a known Greek tale? And I'm also going to Homer. So maybe we've drawn parallels of Taylor Swift and Shakespeare in the past, but maybe Taylor Swift was the Homer of her day.
She is epic and prolific and
her songs explain how the earth was created. So
obviously.
Kind of, yeah, exactly.
101.
Seasonal, all the things.
Seasonal.
Well, long story short, when you think about it in terms of Greek mythology, there is one long story that I think is considered one of the longest stories, and that is the Odyssey. Taylor's 10-minute version of All Too Well is considered her Odyssey. By the way, on the internet, just as I was researching, that came up a lot. And so I think that's funny that it's just her longest song already gets that parallel. But I chose this one because I think that there's a lot of parallels between Odysseus's journey and what the song is about. Walk with me or sail with me. For those of you who are not familiar with the Odyssey, basically a king of Ithaca named Odysseus was also known for his wit and intellect, was a major player in the Battle of Troy, or the Trojan War. I guess it wasn't a battle. He is after the Trojan War, he's trying to go home, but he has managed to anger Poseidon. And Greek gods, with their desire for revenge, they're kind of ruthless. And so Poseidon does everything in his power to delay Odysseus's journey back home. And it actually ends up taking him 10 years to get home. He sailed with 600 men. I believe he's the only one that actually makes it back. He's got a wife waiting at home named Penelope and a son, Telemachus. All of the trials that Odysseus goes through are really, it's the root of so many references in modern day pop culture. Any kind of obstacles, any kind of long journey, anything that's arduous. This song to me is kind of like Odysseus returning home and trying to give an explanation to Penelope in some ways. The story, Homer's story of the Odyssey is kind of Odysseus retelling that story to people when he returns. And it starts off with the word fatefully, which has not much to do with the Odyssey itself, but kind of, because the fates are a really cornerstone part of Greek mythology.
Oh, it's a huge thing with the Odyssey because...
Okay, maybe I just...
Jen wrote about this in our Mastermind deep dive.
Yeah, so
Substack.
The whole point of...
We're just going to be on this one word, fatefully, and the fates. That's it.
No, I mean, we should. Why not?
I can do this quickly. So one thing to also remember in the context of this story is it took Odysseus 10 years to get home, but the Trojan War was also 10 years. So he was gone for 20 years, the full context of that.
True.
And he angers Poseidon, and Poseidon wants to kill him. But in all of Greek mythology, there's this concept of fate, even more than just the fates, but there's some mysterious concept of fate that no matter what the gods want to do, they can't deny fate. Fate is always stronger than them. So Odysseus is fated to get home. So Poseidon is so mad and wants to kill him, but Poseidon is limited, and all he can do is delay him, make him miserable, kill everyone around him. But Odysseus is fated to go home, and there's no god can do anything about that. That if fate is that, it will happen.
Yeah. So, okay, there you go. Clearly had a brain lapse on that part of the story. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking of the fates also, the three spinsters who spin up string that is essentially like, I always envision strings of yarn that determine somebody's fate.
I always think of Hercules, the Disney animated
cut
film.
the cord. Yeah. When you're at your fate's end. I think it's funny that she starts it off with that because it just sets the stage. By the time we get through this, I think you're gonna be like, yes, the song is the Odyssey.
I'm already in.
Okay, I tried to pick my battles till the battle picked me. Odysseus has fought many a wars, the Trojan War being the greatest of all the wars, but he was kind of a decorated general even going into this war, very respected king.
He was known to be the brilliant warrior. The Trojan horse was his idea. So the war ended because of his big brain. He had big brain energy.
But despite all of that intellect, and even though he had been so in control in battles past, nothing could have really prepared him for the Odyssey, right? That was something that picked him. I'm going to speed up a little bit because this is going to become an Odyssey in itself. There's a line, I fell from the pedestal. Odysseus was really respected, and so he was always high up on a pedestal. I was also really tickled by the idea that Greek busts and statues are always decorated on a pedestal, and so here you have a really iconic, legendary character that has maybe fallen from the pedestal. And then we have the understatement of perhaps the millennium. Long story short, it was a bad time.
The understatement of which millennium? That millennium? This millennium?
The last few millennia, right? Like the Odyssey was a long story, and saying it was a bad time. 600 men turned into dust, 10 years wasted, probably an understatement.
I know they just did a reprint of the Odyssey or like a new translation, but I kind of want long story short, it was a bad time to be on the cover of the Odyssey.
Right? It kind of sums it up in a nutshell. Pushed from the precipice, I think the Odyssey kicks off because Poseidon is angry and he's taking revenge, as Jen mentioned earlier. And so the idea that this was out of Odysseus' control clung to the nearest lips.
Oh, I love this.
Odysseus
this is genius.
Odysseus just casually gets sidetracked for 7 years when he gets ensnared by Calypso.
And a year with Circe.
Also
a good book.
Great book, Madeline Miller.
Yeah, great book, Circe. I so much empathy for that amazing, phenomenal witch. Odysseus liked his wife. He loved Penelope, and yet he casually gets sidetracked along the way. Just clung to the nearest lips, you know. And at the Golden Gates, they once held the keys to When I Dropped My Sword. This is a little bit of a stretch, but turns out that the gates to Olympus, Mount Olympus, where all the gods live, does have golden gates, and it was often known as the entrance to the home of the gods. And I just thought that reference was nice because the gods were the ones who were playing these games, and ultimately I think there was a little bit of a battle between Poseidon and Athena too, because Athena was trying to help Odysseus. Odysseus was a big worshiper of Athena, but Poseidon of course was the one that was trying to go for revenge. And then your nemesis will defeat themselves before you get the chance to swing. I really see this as an ode to kind of Odysseus's methodology and strategy. He was very clever as he's dealing with all of these little obstacles. The Odyssey is funny. It's meant to be entertaining. There's cleverness involved there. The way he blinds the Cyclops, the way that he deals with Hydra and Charybdis, and the way he deals with even Calypso, and just every one of the little tales along the way. There's always an element of trickery. There's a Odysseus outsmarting once again and managing to get through the clutches. And to me, that line kind of speaks to that. And then here's a little bit of a Sisyphean reference. There's a line, climbed right back up the cliff, which to me reminded me of Sisyphus rolling that boulder up the hill constantly. It's like you climb all the way up, you roll back down, you have to go back up again. I feel like whenever we have this reference in literature, there's some element of the fact that it's a really tedious task. And so with all of these little Greek references kind of sprinkled throughout, but also the fact that this is about a long story that's short of something that she went through, I really saw some parallels with the Odyssey.
I absolutely love this. I think I was so blinded by the right down the rabbit hole that I'm like, this is about Alice in Wonderland. But no, you found such great elements to tie this to Odysseus. And again, even the last two lines of the song, long story short, it was a bad time. Long story short, I survived. Like I could see him finally coming home to Penelope and she's like, what happened? And she's like, long story short, bad time. Long story short, I survived. Moving on.
Yeah, I think whenever I see the words long story, it's a red flag of just Odyssey, the most classic long story of long stories.
I also really like the line, if the shoe fits, that's in here a couple of times too. So a really cool part of the story is while Odysseus is gone for 20 years, Penelope, I'm not going to go into everything she does, but Penelope is very, very smart and is able to keep suitors away because
Yes.
everyone says Odysseus is dead. And she's like, absolutely not. I don't believe that. I'm not going to marry any of you and make you the king. That's stupid. That's not happening. So she tricks everyone. She is also brilliant. They are power couple to a T. But when Odysseus comes back, he sneaks into the city, his own kingdom. He sneaks in to see what's going on. And essentially, the way he reveals himself is he shoots an arrow with his own bow, which none of the other men in Ithaca can use. Only Odysseus is strong enough and clever enough to use this particular bow. And so that's the moment of revealing of, oh, it's you. It's the concept of if the shoe fits, if the bow fits, it must be Odysseus. He's the only man who can do this.
The person who can break the bow.
Exactly. So that's kind of fun too. Of this, we have shoe fits, high heel breaks, all that kind of stuff. But then
I
we
love
have
it.
Odysseus and his bow, and it's actually kind of the same concept. We just use a different idiom for it now.
Really quick plug, because you brought up the bow and because I am Indian, I have to also reference another long epic tale. Indian mythology also has two really similar long sagas, epic poems that are very old. And there's a lot of parallels I just want to call out between Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey and these two Indian epics as well. And the breaking the bow one is one where there was a Indian king who only the king who could break a bow would be able to marry this princess of this land. So just to call that out, that epics exist everywhere, but Greek mythology, of course, is
Western epics are very well known.
That's why I said West as many times as I could. I was like, this is a very Western thing.
Yeah, Western epics.
Absolutely, but it's one of those things that also just takes to the universality of these stories. They're very just foundational to humans.
Yeah, they're just retold in different cultures, and the ones that we happen to read are the Western ones.
Yeah.
Also want to shout out Emily Wilson was the first woman to translate the Odyssey into English. It was published in 2017.
Yeah, that's the new one I was talking about.
Highly recommend reading that one. There's a whole sub conversation that we're not going to have, but how the Penelope and the women of Penelope's court were treated in translations by men, and Emily Wilson really spent the time understanding the context of that and translated it in a much different way that is more true to how it should have been and does not degrade
sexist.
The women in the same way. Yeah. So I recommend that. She is a classicist. We
will add it to our bookshop, which you'll find in the show notes.
Definitely add it to the bookshop. But in any of these ancient things that we're reading translations of, always ask yourself too, who is doing the translating, because that changes things. Okay, well, I guess it's me. I'll just keep talking. Well, I have the last song. I chose Labyrinth, which is from Midnight's 2022, track 10, written by Taylor Swift and Jack Antonoff. I want to say right now, a hot take. The more I thought about this, the less I really feel like it's actually about the mythological labyrinth.
Well, I like that. Then we have something that we thought would be because of the title, and let's get into it and actually see if it is.
Yeah, let's get into it. So the labyrinth is a place in Greek mythology. There's several stories around the labyrinth. I'm not going to get into them all, but because that's a whole other podcast. However, high level, and this is where I wanted to share this because, again, Greek mythology is so wildly unhinged. So a god of some kind, I believe it was Poseidon, sent the King Minos a snow white bull as a sign of his blessing. And he was supposed to sacrifice that bull back to Poseidon or whatever. The gods made no sense. And Minos was like, I don't want to do this. This bull is beautiful. So Poseidon decided to curse Minos by making Minos' wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with the snow white bull. And so she did what she would do with something she was in love with, and she gave birth to the Minotaur, which was half human, half bull. Sometimes you hear these stories.
Well, I don't want to interrupt your story, but I will say, if you'd like to hear these stories told in like a really fun way, Stephen Fry, Mythos, Heroes, and there's one more that I think is about the Trojan stories. Like, I mean, you have to listen to them, the audiobook, because he retells these classic Greek stories, but in a very Stephen Fry way. Highly recommend.
Amazing.
They're really good.
That sounds so good. So King Minos' solution to this then, though, was obviously we all know what to do when your wife gives birth to a half bull, half human.
What do we
You
do?
build a labyrinth.
Aha,
You
of course.
put the Minotaur
Yeah.
in it, and then you ask the country that you rule over to sacrifice a bunch of their children every year, so the Minotaur kills it.
Naturally.
Kills the kids, as you would. 7 young men and maidens were sent every year to be eaten by the Minotaur.
Isn't this the inspiration for the Hunger Games? The story?
Yeah, I think
this
so.
is- yeah.
I thought about the Hunger Games a lot, actually, as I was thinking about this.
I think this is the inspiration for the Hunger Games.
Yeah, although in that case, it wasn't even. Yeah, the Minotaur is essentially a metaphor then for society's desire for blood,
Just casual.
metaphorically.
Casual.
Anyways. So then eventually Theseus is like, we're not doing this. I'm over this. This isn't happening. So he decides to volunteer, again, Hunger Games, to go. And he's going to go into the labyrinth, but he falls in love with Ariadne, who is the daughter of King Minos. And Ariadne gives him some thread, which helps him track where he went so that he can kill the Minotaur, save everyone, and get back out again.
Some invisible string, if you will.
If you will. I had that thought too. However, the story does end tragically in that I don't remember even why. I have read the full story and I don't remember exactly why, but Theseus on the way home, he takes Ariadne with him and he abandons her halfway home. And he also told his father that he would change the sails on his ship to white if he survived or leave them black if he didn't. And he just forgot to change them. So then his father kills himself. His father was King Aegeus, I think. And that's why it's named the Aegean Sea, is he threw himself into the sea. So it actually ends quite tragically.
Drama.
Yes.
So Taylor wrote a song about this, obviously.
Well, so then Taylor writes a song, Labyrinth, and I'm like, all right, let's do this. I truly, not even listening to the song, was just like, we have to do Labyrinth, obviously. We're doing this. I'm listening to the song Labyrinth. The word comes up one time. This is not a lyric-heavy song. In fact, the last, third of even half of the song is just repeating the chorus over and over again, which I would think there is actually some value to that repetitiveness, but that's a deep dive conversation. So we have the line, lost in the labyrinth of my mind. But we do have some other lines about this kind of exploration that's happening. Things like breathe deep, breathe out. I'll be getting over you my whole life. So there's some sort of a journey, some sort of trying to find your way somewhere, which is a very labyrinth-esque thing. And you know how much I hate that everyone just expects me to bounce back. So the idea, if you're in the middle of this labyrinth with this Minotaur, the idea that you just get out of there, that's not how labyrinths work. So I think the concept of the labyrinth does work in some ways, but the thing that I thought more of was that a maze and a labyrinth are actually different things. A maze has dead ends. A labyrinth has one direct line that you have to follow. You can't
to the center,
and then you can go back out.
I didn't realize that.
And I think that there might be more with that there, but I'll pause because it's the most wild story, and then we get a song about falling in love again. So first thoughts from you two.
I also listened to the song and did notice the fact that it doesn't feel like it has a ton of Greek references right off the bat, but at the same time, just knowing how well read she is about these things, the fact that she chose to title it that definitely feels like there's a deeper connection where these lyrics are addressing one situation, but there seems to be some deeper
meaning.
There has to be a deeper meaning.
Yeah.
And now I sound like one of those conspiracy theorists. What is she trying to tell us?
I'm telling you, Taylor Swift is so popular for one of the reasons she's so popular is humans want to be conspiracy theorists, and she gives us an avenue for that.
Yeah.
Speaking of humans wanting to be conspiracy theorists, the book that I'm currently reading is called Fantasyland by Kurt Andersen, which is basically about how in American culture, at least, we've become so susceptible to hucksters and conspiracy theories and all that stuff. Anyway, side note.
Because we also want the drama.
But it's rooted in our American. It's a deeply American culture back to
adds up
the funding. Anyway, speaking of deeper meaning in this potential song, there's a lot of pain and hurt and fear in this song. Literally, it starts with it only hurts this much right now. This song talks about fear of elevators. You know how scared I am of elevators. Never trusted if it rises fast. Talks about plane crashes. I thought the plane was going down. It only feels this raw right now. breaking. You would break your back to make me break a smile. Like, there's a lot of pain and anguish and fear. And I wonder if in your retelling of the story of the labyrinth, there's a lot of fear and pain and suffering in that story as well.
Yeah, and then the second half of the song is the, oh, I'm falling in love
love.
again. So we kind of have
Turns
that
it around.
pivot. I do think that there could be a connection there that does make a lot of sense, because a lot of people think of Theseus's story as one of the original coming of age stories, that the labyrinth was a place of transformation. He went in a boy, came out a man kind of
Got
thing.
it.
But it was through the pain of that, through the challenge and overcoming the challenge, that he came out. And his father kills himself because he makes a stupid mistake. So I don't know what that means in the context of this, but he does become the king. He does take over. It's his hero story. It's how he becomes who he is. And I do think that happens here in this idea of the labyrinth, of lost in the labyrinth of my mind, is in the first half of the song. And she has to come out of that labyrinth transformed to fall in love again, which is what we get in the second half of the song.
Yeah, and I also, when you listen to the song, there is really a sense of anxiety, I think, in the way that the music is kind of echoing and slow and it builds. And in the beginning, the lyrics to me, like the breathe in, breathe out that you mentioned, the breathe deep, breathe out, even the reference to the elevators, to me, it just creates a sense of claustrophobia. So it's like, how do you create that feeling in a song? And I think the reference to labyrinth, you put yourself in that situation, and then some of these lyrics, like it's really putting you in an enclosed kind of space. And then of course she references the labyrinth of her mind directly to say that maybe it's all in her head. But I do see that parallel, that this entire love story that's happening is in a claustrophobic kind of capacity.
What do we think that means, lost in the labyrinth of my mind?
So that was where I was really getting into this more. I started just looking up labyrinths in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I did know this at one point. I read it and I was like, oh yeah. But take this for what you will with Taylor's personal life, I don't really care about it. But particularly in the UK, labyrinths were often created with monasteries or religious places, because again, a labyrinth is not a maze, it has one direct path. And they were used often as a metaphor for a place of contemplation, that once you were in it, you had to keep walking through, which I think is another really key part of this. I was thinking a lot about the line, you know how much I hate that everybody just expects me to bounce back. Once you're in the labyrinth, you gotta keep going through the labyrinth, you know?
Yeah.
And the center for the monasteries was often symbolically God. So it was supposed to be a prayer path where you would go in and you would have prayerful contemplation, knowing your ultimate goal is to be with God, and that your path is kind of defined for you in that. So you're not spending time thinking, do I turn right? Do I turn left? You can just keep walking, and you can kind of get lost. And in this case, supposed to be in a good way, where you don't really know where you are. You're not thinking about the people around you. Like, you are in, a green space. Usually you're in these tall hedges. And so it's just you and yourself just walking this path quietly, contemplatively, having a spiritual time to an end goal. And I think there's a really good argument throughout Taylor's discography that she often makes comparisons of love to religion. False God is maybe the most obvious example of that. But I was thinking about it again in the context of Greek mythology, of fate as well. Of, I could see a reading of this song that the speaker is fated to fall in love again. It's inescapable. That path is defined. And that the first half is the thoughts of going through that path and going through the pain. And then the second half of the song is almost like a mantra, where she's gotten to this spiritual state of mind and she's just moving forward step by step, repeating this to herself as you would a mantra, or, other spiritual repetition is a really big thing in all spiritual practices.
A mantra is a good word for it, because these labyrinths are also used in like meditation and Zen gardens as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I had the pleasure of going to Crete a few years ago, and I want to write more about this in our Substack. But one of the things that they asked, Crete is where the actual labyrinth is located, the one that's suspected to be in the story. And one of the questions that you kind of ask as you're touring this maze or labyrinth is that what was the Minotaur? Was it real? Is it just legend? Was there some basis of truth, as there often is in legend? And there's a lot of theories about that. But I think one of the theories was that island in particular was on a fault line, and I think gets a lot of volcanic eruptions or earthquakes or whatever. And so was the Minotaur like the natural rumble? In the story of Ariadne, I think she does eventually kill the Minotaur. And so I think that, or is it Minotaur? Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong.
I've said it both ways this whole time, and I'm just going to keep doing that because I don't know.
I think there's a question of also like if you're trapped in the labyrinth and there's this monster that lives there, and then do you have to defeat that monster to get out or to overcome? And so that monster in reality and in the story, I think, is open to interpretation for what it is. And if there's something that you have to defeat as you're falling in love again, I think there's this nice underlying metaphor for you have to overcome whatever that mentor might be for you.
Especially if the labyrinth is in your mind.
Especially if the labyrinth is in your mind, right? Like you cannot move out, you move on, you cannot transform, you can't come out, not only because it's only one way in, but because there's something lurking there that you have to defeat in order to be able to emerge from that. So that's also like one way to read the song.
Yeah.
I enjoy that despite the fact that I assumed that this would be clearly a Greek mythology song, that, you know, we did find some connections, but it wasn't as straightforward as maybe the title would suggest.
Yeah. Honestly, DM us listeners what you think, because full disclosure to everyone, due to some logistics changing, we pivoted to this topic very last minute, so I did not prepare as much as I normally would.
But we knew that we would do Greek mythology, but like, yes, to your point.
We knew we would do Greek mythology, but I didn't listen to the song until about 30 minutes before we hit record.
I think it's kind of fun. This is our fresh insights. It's kind of fun that way.
Yes, it is. Well, thank you for listening, and join us next week for maybe some fresh insights, maybe some research insights. You'll have to listen to find out. We'll catch you next time.
That's all we have for you today on AP Taylor Swift. Be sure to rate and review us on your favorite podcast app. Follow us on your social channel of choice at AP Taylor Swift to stay up to date. And join us next time as we overanalyze and deep dive into the next Taylor Swift song on AP Taylor Swift.